Welcome everyone to NASCA's Thought Leadership Series. We are really excited to kick off today with another executive education. For those who have been joining us over the last couple of months, you'll know that we've explored topics like employee engagement, strategic workforce, real estate optimization. And today is our last day in this session that we've been exploring over the last couple of months. We're really excited to kick off our first session. We'll have about 30 minutes where we'll really explore what Michigan did with our ERP system with wonderful thought leaders and partners from CGI. So we will get that session started. And then after that, we'll come back and we'll do our NASCA Top 10. We'll preview with you all what NASCA has been thinking and doing and what we're doing into 2021. So we're going to go ahead and do our first session. I'll be back in 30 minutes for us to talk about the NASCA Top 10. All right, so here we go.
Good afternoon. My name is Ivan Baraha. I am a lead solution architect for CGI's strategy group, part of a public sector group. And in that role, I've had the pleasure of working with some of our largest and most complex public sector clients. Today, it's a distinct privilege to introduce Director Ruth Schwartz, who works for the state of Michigan. And in her role, she oversees the state's Sigma project, transformational project that state of Michigan undertook about 7 years ago this time. Good afternoon, Ruth.
Good afternoon, Yvonne. It's nice to see you. I'm coming to you from the great state of Michigan. Fortunately, I am not actually at those frozen waterfalls behind us, but I love to show off some of the beauty that our state has to offer. As Yvonne mentioned, I am the director of our Sigma Operations and Support program. I ran our ERP implementation project. I've got about 24 years of experience in state government, senior deputy director within DTMB, and director of Sigma Operations and Support.
It is wonderful to have you this afternoon, Ruth. And one of the things that is the theme of this particular conference at NASCA is the notion that 2020 has been a very different year for just about everyone. It has challenged us in personal ways as we made transition to working from home and connecting with our colleagues in virtual format and our clients. It has challenged us in a professional way, in a profound way, because it really underscored the importance that public sector and public sector servants have in terms of ensuring the continuation of our work and well-being really is there for us. So as we've all made this sort of a transition, it provided some perspective for, I think, everybody in that regard as well. It required the state, local employees to work and adapt a lot quicker in an environment that they were not necessarily accustomed to working from and continuing to serve their constituents. So one of the things that it sort of reminded me of is that the ability to innovate and ability to do things quickly and respond to unforeseen challenges really comes down to two things. How do we prepare, and are we prepared to undertake some of these challenges going ahead? And then from platforms and processes perspective. And then the other element, which is associated with the human element of that. Are we ready to undertake these changes in an agile and quick fashion? And one thing really came to mind, which was the Sigma transformation that I think put the state of Michigan in a right place to tackle challenges, even though of course nobody could have foreseen CARES and COVID being a part of that. So I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit with us in terms of how did you create and foster this environment and platform for innovation and change in the state of Michigan?
Sure. And that's a great observation, Yvonne, in terms of the ability to take what we do transformationally and apply it to the unexpected and unanticipated. SIGMA, which stands for Statewide Integrated Governmental Management Applications, we all have to have an acronym, was formed out of what initially began as Legacy Application Modernization Program, where then Budget Director Nixon was able to attain funding to allow the state to bring our legacy systems into the current century, not just decade in some cases. And Sigma was one of those. It was a project formulated on replacing 24-year-old statewide ERP solution, Maine, as well as 5 or 6 other statewide systems. It very quickly evolved into becoming a business transformational project under then Governor Snyder's 10-point plan to make Michigan the leader in not just the nation, but the world in terms of government operations. So we very quickly shifted from the focus of the project being about technology to the focus of the project being about technology enabling transformation, enabling resiliency. Overall, we kept our objectives at the forefront throughout the life of the project. And those objectives, we had 17 separate objectives, but they all boiled down to standardization. Standardization on process, on data, and to the commercial off-the-shelf software that we selected, which is the CGI Advantage solution. Throughout the project, that remained at the forefront. We had strong inclusive governance from the governor through the end users. We had participation in the selection of over 300 agency representatives. We had participation on the governing board of every executive branch agency in the state of Michigan. And we had participation on the project team from the state side of about 75 full-time dedicated state employees who wanted to be part of it. We used a three-legged stool approach to selecting our project team. The first step was the individual wanted to be a part of the team, wanted to be a part of this transformational effort. That was key because, as we all know, these projects take on a life of their own and they take over your life. There are long hours, stressful moments, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into these. So having volunteerism as opposed to voluntoldism was key. Second leg of that stool was we felt they were a fit. They brought the skills, knowledge, dedication, and enthusiasm that we needed. And the third was that their home department was willing to give them up. We fully funded those resources so that the state agencies could temporarily backfill, so that we weren't harming the operational needs that needed to occur while the project took place. I give that background because it's important to set the stage for how we accomplished what we did. Standardization in state government, as we all know, is tough. And we were taking 24-plus-year-old systems that had been built, designed, and deployed at an individual siloed agency perspective to standardize. So by way of example, one of the first initiatives was looking at our chart of account structures. And when we analyzed the legacy system data, we found not only no standardization, but no standardization even within individual departments. One of the examples we held up as this change management effort is going to be tough was the coding to identify the location of spend. We found over 17 different chart of account element uses occurring to identify location. What does that mean? You can't standardize reporting. Conversion was going to be tough, and our organizational change management efforts was going to be astronomical. We knew all that going into it, and we're very proud to have accomplished all of the objectives despite the tremendous change management efforts we were undertaking. We're quite proud of the implementation. We believe it to be history making and record setting, on time, under budget, full scope, accomplished. How did we do that with such a massive undertaking? The system replaced our accounting, procurement, time and labor, cost accounting, grant management, budget development systems, and numerous other agency-specific systems. We retired over 60 agency-specific systems as a result of the project, as well as 6 enterprise systems. We had an aggressive timeline, but we had a collaborative partnership aggressive team. At peak, we had over 200 people, state, CGI, and a couple of third-party contractor members on site working collaboratively together. Because of the timeline, we started out waterfall, but we naturally had to shift to agile as the parallel efforts needed to take place to stay on time and under budget. So although during the implementation we never formally shifted to agile, the work efforts really very much fell through that process, that protocol to stay on track. Stakeholder involvement was key, executive sponsorship was key. All of this set the stage for us to be successful. I mentioned it already, history making, record setting, and in my opinion, I'm a little biased. But the end result was we went live on time, statewide, all functions, all modules, with that standardization at the forefront. That set the stage for us to be able to be nimble to whatever might come. Yvonne, you're absolutely right. We did not expect the whatever might come to be a worldwide pandemic, but we shifted seamlessly into remote operations without missing a beat when the time came. And I, in fact, a little personal anecdote, was on vacation on a beautiful tropical island while COVID-19 was hitting the United States. So it was very surreal returning to the States, to Michigan, and it was very rewarding to get back in that state of chaos and find that my entire team had seamlessly shifted to remote work and kept operations up and running to support our 15,000 end users, our 50,000 state employee self-service users, and at the time, our 150,000 active vendor self-service users.
Well, thanks for sharing that perspective, Ruth. It truly is a fantastic endeavor, and we're just delighted to have the opportunity to have that partnership with the state of Michigan and with your team at the TMB and across the state. As you've mentioned, in terms of COVID coming to the shores in the US and in terms of the reaction, as the Congress passed CARES Act into law, there were a lot of things that were very, very fluid. There was obviously a very strong desire from the federal government to help and realization that they needed to help the states continue running the operations. But there was a lot of fluidity in terms of how they wanted to go about that and what they specifically required. So the general notion from the Treasury was that they wanted to utilize the gates that already existed in terms of grant dissemination, certain infrastructure that is sort of well established between federal and state governments. So that was sort of understood as a goal. But in terms of how the reporting and how the grant are going to be actually managed and reported on, there were certain transitions that happened over the course of the next few months as the things really solidified. So I was thinking maybe you could share a little bit with us in terms of what facilitated that ability to be that fluid and still meet the objectives and meet the standards that were required. Because obviously certain things you already had in place with Sigma, as we discussed, and then certain things needed to be built, and at that they needed to be built in a hurry.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I would start by saying, preceding the federal CARES Act funding, as was true for everybody, as we were waiting for the federal government to take action and get funding to us, much needed emergency funding, we had to initiate our own. So our legislature did enact emergency funding. And I mention that because it's a precursor to what we did for the CARES Act funding. That emergency funding had to be accounted for, as it does any funding, but specific reporting requirements were enacted associated with that to ensure that the monies were used properly for the emergency needs, for PPE, for first responders, and the like. We were able to immediately, and by immediately I mean within hours, not days, identify the reporting codes to use from a chart of account perspective, build and deploy a business intelligence report to properly capture, collect, and report on that emergency funding that was enacted from the state level. How could we do that? we standardized. That original implementation and standardizing on the chart of account elements meant we were able to immediately say, know, and be certain how our department's using chart of account elements, which ones should we use, which ones will identify the right level of detail and turn that around. So then along came the CARES funding, and we were operating under a perspective of tracking using that same structure, using those same reportings, anticipating and waiting for the actual reporting requirements from the feds to be promulgated. And as you mentioned, there was a lengthy period of evolving changes, lengthy meaning a few weeks to a couple of months, as opposed to the few hours in which we turned around the initial reporting. As we waited, when the US Treasury issued the reporting requirements, they issued them with virtually no turnaround time. And what we learned was that although we had the structures in place to report on the spend of the data, we were not positioned to report the subrecipient data at the detailed level that the federal government deemed necessary. So we quickly reached out to CGI as well as other partners throughout the state to find the best, fastest, most nimble solution to be able to turn this around. We could have simply used the reporting structures we put in place to capture the spend, but that would have shifted a tremendous burden to our departments to collect and compile and report the subrecipient information. So to give some scope and perspective, State of Michigan had over $3 billion in CARES Act funding to deploy to our local agencies, to individuals in need, to housing development associations, to the Michigan Restaurant Association, and the like, to keep our economy afloat through the pandemic. We had over 140 CARES Act funded grant programs, pushing money out to over 800 local units of government and school districts, literally thousands of businesses, and an exponential number of individuals beyond that. So the idea that we were going to have to collect and compile the information centrally for the subrecipient level reporting had all of our department finance and budget offices in a state of shock and fear, I think would be safe to say. So in reaching out, we found that CGI was already ahead of the game on this and partnering in other locations, I think it was the state of West Virginia, to stand up some web-based data collection tools. The OnQ solution was used in another state in a different way, but we found that it was going to fit our needs. And we, in a matter of weeks, turned around from identifying it was a fit, how to collect the data, designing the forms for data collection and reporting, and deploying it to production successfully. Now, the OnQ solution did not need to be used for 100% of the grants being distributed. Some agencies did have other means. So for example, our school districts already report data in through our Center of Educational Performance Initiatives, and so they were able to continue using that. We also had a large number of the grant funding that could be aggregated, so we didn't need the detailed subrecipient data. But for the vast majority of our local units of government, that tool provided the ability to allow the local units of government to report into the state, enabling the state agencies responsible for those specific programs to verify, compile, and submit to the federal government. So it was really a wonderful partnership, collaborating not just Sigma and CGI, but bringing in our COVID Office of Accountability and Transparency, our Office of Internal Audit Services, our Department of Treasury, and many other agencies to participate directly. Did we have the time to build and develop a project plan and train people on agile methodologies? Absolutely not. But we had it inherent in our operating style by this time. We've been live with Sigma for just over 3 years in terms of full scope statewide at that point. So operationally, organizationally, my team was able to step up to the plate and say, don't worry, we've got this. We'll take lead on the project management component so that our business owners and users could focus on getting the work done. We deployed the Office of Internal Audit Services and our COVID Office of Accountability deployed weekly webinars using Teams to bring everybody virtually together, which is the world we now live in, to keep folks informed, to keep them on track, to train them, to educate them. Our existing help desk was able to simply add the help desk support for the locals and our state agencies on the OnQ reporting solution. And it all went very seamlessly, very quickly, and very successfully into production. Was it pain-free? No, I would be lying if I were to say it was. So some of the challenges we had, we have the standardization of data and process in Sigma for the core accounting functions and core procurement functions. But relative to our original implementation scope, there were certain functions that were deployed and are in use, but were left optional in terms of containing scope. So the full grant lifecycle management solution in Sigma is used extensively by some agencies and very limited by others. So what did that mean? That meant the data needed to load the subrecipient profiles, is what we labeled them, to get the on-queue connections cleanly in place for the reporting, did not have 100% standardization. So there were some manual efforts that had to go into evaluating and cleansing the data to get it loaded. There were some manual efforts for our Department of Treasury to update some of the data fields from external sources of data. But ultimately, we were able to get that all done. And the good thing about those pain points is we now have an additional hit list for continuous improvement that we can bring into our next Sigma initiatives. The additional item, that was challenging was the ever-changing requirements, right? The requirements came out, they were published, and I think it was 2 days later they were changed, and then a day later or a week later they were changed again. The beauty is, with taking an agile methodology, we were able to be resilient to those changes and update and ultimately be very successful in very short order with turning the functionality on.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth, for sharing that perspective and that journey. It certainly speaks to Michigan's ability to adapt and learn, but I think it also talks about some of the things that state has done really, really well in terms of engaging your localities very actively as part of the data transformation process and that standardization process, but also in terms of the outreach and the type of help that the state can offer to the localities. Maybe you could share a little bit with us in terms of how do you foster that type of collaboration, and what is it that you do in Michigan that makes some of this collaboration truly different and unique?
Yeah, so the fostering of the collaboration, I think happens from several levels and several angles or directions. We foster the collaboration by providing solutions. So the Sigma solution, for example, is our statewide ERP. Our local units of government have the ability to use it directly for some components of their procurement processes. So we have those relationships built in relative to use of the system. Our colleges and universities submit their capital outlay requests, for example, directly into the system. So there's an aspect of providing solutions. We have numerous organizations in the state of Michigan that are collaborative between the state and local units of government that help to ensure the relationships exist. And all of our funding that passes through to the local units of government outside of CARES Act, outside of a pandemic, flows through Sigma. So the local units of government were already accustomed to reaching out to our end user support group, our help desk, for assistance with, needing to, where is my payment, or I don't understand the remittance advice, or things of that nature. So we had already in place, embedded, a natural relationship, call number, email addresses, and things of that nature. And of course, our Department of Treasury also has very strong interactive working relationships with the local units of government, because the tax funding in Michigan flows through from the state to the locals. So those are components relative specific to how did we get the locals where they needed to be so quickly. overall, the director of Sigma operations and support, I believe passionately in collaboration within and beyond the state of Michigan borders, so to speak. We all learn, we all grow when we share help, when we share information and resources, successes and failures, right? Failures are only failures if you fail to learn from them. So I embed that inherent tendency in my team, in my staff, to reach out and reach across to help each other. And that's how we all are able to succeed.
And that indeed is the true spirit of NASCA. So we definitely appreciate that. Ruth, you shared this wonderful journey over the last 7 years, and in terms of the agility that you had to deploy to react to some of the unforeseen circumstances and how we work together to collaborate on that. Tell us maybe about the future direction. What is it that you see that is coming forward? What are some of the opportunities that lie ahead of us? And what are some of the planned activities? And maybe from a personal and professional perspective, what do you feel very excited about in the coming months and years?
Sure. I'm extremely excited that we are actually in the process of the detailed planning for our upgrade to Sigma. We went live statewide with all the functions in October of 2017 and always anticipated we would have a major upgrade in 3 to 4 years, and we are right on track with that. So we initially started planning the upgrade actually a year ago, and understandably, everything was put on hold due to the pandemic. So we're really excited to be resuming those activities. So the detailed planning is underway, and our upgrade effort to take Sigma to the Advantage 4 release will occur. The kickoff from an end user, from an agile perspective, will start late March, early April after we complete the detailed planning. That upgrade will take us from a system that is working well, we call it the backbone of state government operations, to improved, tailored usability for our end users. The new release brings us a business role-based paradigm. So without customization to the software, we're going to be able to address any outstanding pain points from an end user perspective, make the system more intuitive, streamlined, and expand on the standardization journey that we began with. I mentioned the learning from the CARES Act examples was, okay, now it is time to tackle some of those grant lifecycle management functions that we allowed more. We called it flexible standardization during the original implementation, right? Let's bring in some of this more increased standardization now that we can. Another example that during the CARES reporting was found was DUNS number was not consistently put on the vendor record, because it's an optional field. So how do we tailor for the vendor records that should have DUNS number? How do we tackle those next levels of standardization? So we do anticipate improved, increased use of some of the optional functions within our upgrade. We are tackling the upgrade in what we're calling a hybrid agile approach. So instead of getting into the middle of the project and realizing, we've got to shift from waterfall to agile, we're starting out agile. We want our end users engaged and participating, and our business owners and stakeholders engaged and participating from day one, seeing the design as it evolves, seeing the hands on the keyboard, participating in the experience where we're improving and knocking down any remaining inefficiencies that exist in the process. So that at the back end, when we get to everything is configured, we have a solid system ready to implement. We will then shift from agile to a more traditional waterfall testing approach to test end-to-end integration, user acceptance testing before going live. Can you do agile without doing that back-end testing? Yes. But in a traditional agile, you're doing that because you're taking small pieces to your production environment incrementally. By necessity from a scope perspective and by necessity from a cost perspective, we will be taking the entire upgrade to production all at once, big bang, all functions, all business roles, all users. We don't feel that we should attempt the risk of doing that without a full integration test on the back end. So we've developed this hybrid approach. We're really excited about moving to that next level for many reasons. One, just the state of the art technologies that are being brought forward are very cool. Lots of nice, robust functionality and bells and whistles, right? DevOps, container platform, all of the things that help ensure the stability and integrity of the system, and more importantly, position us to simply remain current. We are referring to this as our first major upgrade of Sigma and our last major upgrade of Sigma, because beyond this upgrade, we will shift to an agile operations mode. We're on a 4-month cycle. We will be moving improved functionality, product releases from CGI into production every 4 to 8 months, and continuing to streamline and do outreach to increase the participation in some of the optional functions of the system. So we're really excited about it. Also a little nervous, right? My team is, 3 years after the full go live, has a little bit of, breathing room finally, and we are focusing on the project to keep our work-life balance in order during the project. So we've intentionally built an extended timeline. We believe very strongly that this upgrade could occur in a year or so. We are expanding the timeline to 27 months in order to ensure that A, we maintain our operational system, because we can't just stop issuing $60 billion of payments every year, and that our team members can maintain the right quality work-life balance. The other thing we're nervous about is we're focusing on the upgrade in a remote world. And so in the background, we're strategizing on how do we replace the things that we would normally brainstorm on a physical whiteboard sitting around a conference table virtually. And in the last year, like all of the others on this conference, we've all developed proficiency in using Teams, Zoom, and other things like that. So we are strategizing on how do we replace those things that really need that more tangible interaction, because we do expect that we're going to be several more months before we're comfortable or safe to be in person. So there's a little bit of anxiety around that, but I'm so confident in my team's ability to tackle really anything that gets thrown their way.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for sharing those perspectives. It truly has been a great pleasure for CGI to be a good partner for the state of Michigan and share this journey with you. So we appreciate your perspectives, and we'll be there for this next transition going forward. Much appreciated. Thank you for this afternoon.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Well, thank you both to the state of Michigan and to CGI for those lessons learned around what they did. So now we're going to transition to our NASCA Top 10. A lot of the themes you just heard in the Michigan story around transitioning to their ERP, we're going to talk about right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over NASCA's Top 10. We also have Secretary Brennan from the state of Wisconsin on the line today. So I'm going to go over what we heard, some of the aggregate trends when we talked to all 50 states about what's happening in state government. I'm going to go over 5 of them, and then we're going to jump to Wisconsin and really hear what's happening on the ground with the state. So before we kick off, is there anything that you want to say? We've got Secretary Brennan on the line.
I just, again, Jamie, happy to join you and look forward to sharing what we're doing a little bit in Wisconsin here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking time today. We know that there's a lot going on right now in the world, as well as several states are in session. So first off, as you can see in front of you, we have the top 10. What we did is we interviewed all of our state chief administrators around the country, and then we took the last 2 months to really aggregate these trends. So I'm going to go over the top 5, and I'll go to the next slide. What we're going to dive deep into is really high-level trends. What's on the horizon for 2021? Just some high-level trends that we found. There was a big focus on current employees, a lot around mental health, a lot around burnout, what's keeping employees engaged. What was really interesting is when we typically do this survey, we see a lot on recruitment, on getting new employees. And so for the first time since we've done this survey, there was much more of a focus on the health and well-being of current employees over recruitment. So we thought that was an interesting trend. As you'll see, for the first time in our NASCA top 10, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion on that top 10. So that looks different in every state. That may look like getting more local businesses involved in procurement, or that may look like having your workforce be more representative in state government. And then another interesting trend is really leveraging operations to aid in some policy social goals. So whether that's leveraging state purchasing to buy more from small businesses or from your local economy, or whether that is having your workforce be reflective of your state demographic. So really how your operations also looks like those policy goals. We could not talk about top 10 without talking about revenue projections and how that continues to be moving targets. But what's also interesting is when we were talking to states and we've been doing these interviews, is they've done a lot of, just because of tight budgets, homegrown solutions, really using the capacity and staff you currently have. And then once you know why you need a vendor, having really specific targeted vendor solutions with these tight budgets. And then as well, there'll be new federal administration's policy shifts and funding priority shifts that will happen in this new year. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to focus on budget for a second. Just some high level budget trends of what we saw across the country is those, and I'm sure we'll hear the Wisconsin story here in a second, but the revenue projections continue to be moving targets. On average, for most states for fiscal year 2021, it was not as drastic as originally predicted. And then we kind of already talked about some homegrown solutions with really specific vendor solutions. And then there was different strategies used around the country on really what levers they use to respond to the budget. So in 23 states, they had very targeted cuts to different agencies, whereas in the previous year, there's a lot of across the board cuts. So there's across the board cuts in about 9 states. Another lever that a lot of states used was eliminating vacant positions or having hiring freezes, as well as transferring funds from one-time funding to be able to fill the budget gap. But also was an interesting trend when we looked at all the states is there was several states that were able to give raises. So we had 18 states that gave some type of across the board raise, and then 9 states that have merit raises. So that was an interesting trend as well. And this is from our partners at NASCA. So let's go to the next slide. 3 other big high-level trends were customer service and customer experience. And this was both on how the departments of administration work with their customers across the state government, really being responsive to their needs, to health and human services needs, to corrections needs, really being the trust with agency relationships and the confidence that the Department of Administration can answer that need. Another big trend we saw was data management and analytics. So what was the infrastructure, the governance to make different data platforms talk to each other? And then very similar, digital government. So what was also interesting is during COVID, there was a lot of new digital platforms that rolled out for the citizens to be able to interact with government, as well as digital government for internal government. We saw e-procurement platforms, we saw e-signature platforms, we saw digital training. So a lot of digital government was talked about over the last year and will continue to be a trend in the next year. And the next one, and then we're going to go to what's happening in Wisconsin is, and I kind of alluded to this, the diversity, equity, and inclusion in procurement. So for several states, and I put Minnesota on here because they've been working on this for a while, this has really become a priority for them a couple years ago, but you're also seeing both red and blue states make this a priority for purchasing. So here's a couple of recent news articles from our partners over in New Mexico and in Nebraska on how they can leverage state purchasing to help local businesses, to help female businesses, to help minority-owned businesses, really using state purchasing dollars to help that economic development of small and local businesses, making it easier for those businesses to do government with the state. So with that, I know we've gone over a lot, kind of high-level trends. What does this look like in the state of Wisconsin?
Thanks, Jamie. And I think it's, I think for lots of us, we're either in the midst of or entering budget time, and in Wisconsin, that's no different. The governor will introduce our biennial budget for the next 2 years in about 2.5 weeks. And so we have spent the last 5 months, really 6 months, putting that together. And in some ways, getting ready for what comes next. And during the course of the last 6 months, starting in the end of the previous fiscal year, the governor in the closing weeks of that called for about $70 million of reductions in general purpose revenue across the enterprise. We did another $300 million in the current fiscal year. So in Wisconsin, we cut about $370 million out of the general purpose revenue across, although targeted in some places. We did spare places like the Department of Workforce Development, who's been on the front lines with unemployment insurance and the overwhelming needs there. So we've done all that in preparation for the end of the current fiscal year and giving us as much as we could to have us have the largest balance possible moving into the next biennium. And as is the case in lots of places, the news gets marginally better all the time. Yesterday, our Legislative Fiscal Bureau, they put out their estimates for the end of the current fiscal year and into the next biennium, and they're better by about a little over $1 billion across that time. And so it gives us a little bit more flexibility as we move into what that's going to look like and where our investments are going to be. Going back 6 months to the beginning of the budget process, the instructions that I sent out, or that we sent out on behalf of the governor across the enterprise were, no new positions because of where we were in a fiscal standpoint, putting a premium on the basic vital services that we have, but also ensuring that the two things that we put as priorities were equity and sustainability. And so equity is something I think that it gets into the next set of slides I think you're going to talk about too, but it's something that is hugely important for us. And maybe the other thing I'll say about the things that you brought up there on the data management and analytics side, Wisconsin, no different than lots of other states, was truly overwhelmed when it came to unemployment insurance and the needs that were immediate in March. We have a system, that's 50 years old in terms of some of the hardware and challenges that we have faced over time. And there's a need for overall modernization of that moving forward. But like several other states did, we used Google. We saw what was going on in other places. We used their predictive analytics to help curb the backlog that we had and bring us to, there are really only two things. Without being able to replace the system immediately, you can work on some technology from the outside or people. And we employed both. We took people from across the enterprise, put them into the unemployment insurance system and did that work. But then we had to also rely, as other states did, on, and they're better than Band-Aids, but they're the work that we could do on the technology side to try to meet those demands. And to the credit of our partners and the people we've been working with, I think we've done a lot better, but that came after, some very challenging times. And we all know the stories in our states of people who waited months for that relief to come and the way that affected their lives. So there's lots of those things that we've been doing, a lot of things that we've done on, the delivery of virtual services, virtual bid openings, things like that, the use of DocuSign. When you have 70%, we still have about 70% of the state workforce working remotely. In order to do that, you have to be able to have the tools so that people can effectively do their day jobs, in addition to all of the extra work and the real vital services that we have done. We're in Wisconsin, we got about $2 billion in the coronavirus relief fund, and the administration and those funds, a lot of those went through the Department of Administration too and across the enterprise. So there's a lot of ways in which the priorities that you lay out are things that we have lived over the last several months and will continue to be employing. One other note that I'd make of just things that changed on the fly, that there may be a long-term change coming with, things like in the Department of Motor Vehicles. Wisconsin, probably amongst other states, we went from having to, I remember when I was 16 having to take my driver's test, as did everybody, as do many others. Well, in the time of the height of the pandemic, when we couldn't do that, the DMV and the Department of Transportation moved to a different system, and they found out that worked, and there were other innovations that worked, and they may be looking at doing some of those changes more permanently, or doing that over a longer period of time. So I think that's where we're all coming to. But again, and I'll finish, then I'll let you maybe go into what the next round of these, but across everything that we're doing, and I don't think Wisconsin's different than other states, diversity, equity, and inclusion are all part of, whether it's in the procurement side or whether it's about the employees and attracting, retaining employees. In late 2019, Governor Evers here in Wisconsin put out an executive order around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every agency was required by the end of 2020 to do their own equity plan. We'll be we're coordinating a conversation next week across the enterprise with all of my cabinet colleagues and all of their departments to talk about the execution and the optimization of those things. There's an equity council, both set up with people inside state government, but also outside in the private sector, that will start to meet in February. And the charge there is to deliver to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and to the Department of Administration, all the things that we can be doing to increase and to really activate and operationalize equity across our efforts in Wisconsin. Because as everybody understands, we've kind of reached this inflection point when it comes to our workforce, and we need to be focused very directly on the current workforce we have. And when 2/3 of people looking for a job and more than half of people who are in these jobs want diversity to be part of their experience and are demanding it, we need to be responsive to that. And that's not something that started with COVID-19. I think in lots of places we've been working on that, but it's something certainly that's been heightened. And as we're thinking about how do we all want to continue to evolve into being employers of choice, and when others have options out there, I think those are areas where we really want to ensure that we're trying to be on the forefront and trying to lead the way where we can.
So much that we can learn from Wisconsin. So we're going to dive into the next 5, and we've got Pam on the line, the NASCA Executive Director, who's kind of going to do a deep dive there. But we definitely learned a lot from Wisconsin. All right, Pam, so kick us off with the next set.
Thank you, Jamie and Secretary Brennan. I appreciate both of your comments, and really the Wisconsin story is a perfect tee up as we're moving into the next 5 of our priorities for our states. Really what Joel was saying is so true. So many things happened in 2020 that have informed not only the work that everyone is doing in the states, but this list of priorities as we look to 2021 and into the future. So many things, again, that we never expected. And I think a couple of the things that you're going to see on the rest of this list perhaps would very unlikely pop into a NASCA top 10, but due to the conditions and what we've had to experience the past now almost 11 months, has become a necessity for our states. You did hear the Secretary talk about the critical importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in procurement, but also in our workforce. Number 6 here on our list, really looking both internally and externally. This is one of the things that we've talked about so much with our members here. This is not only ensuring that we're training our own teams on unconscious or implicit bias, but then how those personal attitudes can impact the work that we're doing around human capital, strategic planning, and all of the work around the workforce, retention, succession planning, what the demographics look like in each of our agencies, definitely a core component of our work for 2021. Also looking directly at our employees, their engagement, their experiences, again, a total shift from when we're all in person, coming to the office 5 days a week, but now when we're in an overnight remote situation, how do we continue to not only check on our employees, but continue to create the culture that we know is so critically and vitally important for state government? How do we continue to do those touch points? Continue to check in on the well-being of our employees. What's the mental health conditions of those? We're not able to see each other in the office on a normal and routine basis. What are some of those celebratory opportunities that we have now in a remote workforce? Some of our states are seeing some migration back into the office, but at a very, very limited pace. Some states are saying we're going to continue this remote condition for some time. And perhaps the employees at the state level are some of the last to come back into the office. So now what does that do? Again, as we're continuing to check on all of our employees. Strategic workforce planning. This is something that NASCA has been looking at now for some time, but really, how did the global health pandemic ensure that we had to make some changes? Again, you heard the Secretary talk about unemployment insurance, some of the vehicular conditions that had to happen. We've shifted some of our employees. They've gone into roles that perhaps they were not initially employed to do, trained to do. How did that deployment work? What things can we take from that? Some states are saying we are going to have to reduce our headcounts. So again, what does that do to not only just the global landscape of state workforce personnel, but the planning, that total enterprise-wide vision. So let's go to the next slide here and take a look a little bit deeper at strategic workforce planning. If you can see this across the last nearly 10 years, state government has pretty much remained flat over that time. You can see the differences with state and local versus the private sector. And again, we do see that very flat line, less than 1% increase over the last period of 9 years. We do expect more retirements and resignations to come. So again, what does this mean for our strategic planning? And also, we're seeing a decrease in those applications. How do we become that employer of choice? How do we ensure that this is one of the first places an applicant will look to become employed? All right, let's move on to the next slide, please. And then rounding out the top 10, how many of us thought we would ever see supply chain and stockpile management in the top 10 list of priorities for our states? Probably not many of us, but it's very, very real, and it's very, very true. This is something that our states are all grappling with. How long do we need to do this? What does our inventory management look like? Who's in charge? Really, where does this live? This also brings in the whole supplier diversity component as well, kind of a tag along with our DEI and procurement as well. And then finally, workspaces and built space optimization or reduction. I think all of our states are looking at leases, also the privately owned properties. What does that mean when we're starting to hotel or hoteling, the concept of having folks share space? Again, what does that mean for the state as far as the global portfolio, the footprint, cost reductions, etc. So let me again turn to Secretary Brennan and hear a little bit more about Wisconsin's approach to these 5.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. And the slide you put up about workforce and what that looks like is one that really drives home for me. And I'm guessing the experience in Wisconsin and even in our departments is not much different than my colleagues around the country. We did a little event the other day celebrating everything that was accomplished in 2020, despite the challenges, what was accomplished, but also looking forward to 2021. And one of the things we did was we noted retirements that had happened in 2020. And we had about 65 people retire out of our department that's got about 1,200 or 1,300 people, but they brought with them a collective more than 1,000 years of service. And, so when that happens, and we are at a point where I think all of us understand that the services that we have are as necessary as ever. In fact, they're probably in some ways people need us more, and people have understood that there are direct government services that only government can provide, and that we've really been tested and needed to provide those over the last several months. I mean, that's daunting, but it speaks to how both diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee engagement have to be central in what we're doing. We have to rely on people to continue to do what they've done over the core, just the core services that we provide, but also layering on there all of the additional needs that we've had that have been expressed and that really aren't going away over the next several months as we hopefully get to the end of the pandemic and where we're going. The other things that we certainly, on the stockpile management, I don't know that a lot of us thought about supply chain or all those things as much as those who were in procurement certainly did, but when we all were in need of N95 masks and when there were all of the things that towns, everything that we were looking for our partners in public health and in delivery and making sure we could keep people safe on the front lines. And we could find none of that stuff close to home. I think that's a challenge that we all are grappling with. And this is a federal state challenge as well. But as much as anything, it allows us all to look at how we're all interwoven. And there were any number of occasions where here in Wisconsin, we aligned with our partners in Illinois and Michigan and other places trying to provide or to band together to get the best deal or to get something where there was nothing. And even that was challenging. So we all have to be looking at how we're going to beef those things up and where we're going. On the real estate side, I want to note, your point about hoteling and, again, we've done surveys and we're looking at, as I said, 70% of people, aside from those who work in the prison facilities or in the health facilities or the 24-hour type places, most people are still working remotely, and we expect that to continue for the next several months. But at the same time, we've done continued analysis of their productivity, their preferences moving forward. They are not interested largely in coming back to the workforce, the workplace that they left. And so we're exploring the hoteling options. We've done that in one of our state office buildings here in Madison, but also looking at across the state where else we can do that. By necessity, we are looking at collapsing leases and putting things together. There are other creative things that by the fact of what's gone on over the last year, I think we're exploring more than we would have. The Wisconsin Historical Society has been looking for a place to put their museum. They've been working on this over the last 25 years. We're now looking at co-locating that museum with a state office building project using a really terrific piece of real estate that's got a 50-year-old, 50 or 60-year-old state office building on it that probably has a higher and better use, but can we integrate into that public space and make that something that we can look at for the long term? We also are building a new state office building. Our state capital's in Madison. We have a state office building in Milwaukee, which is the state's largest community. And as we look at that, we're collapsing leases in and around Milwaukee. The size of that building has grown, but generally it's grown because of the services we think that we can align there, even if some of those people are going to be working remotely. And even if we're going to, have reached this inflection point where as an employer, we're going to have to be more nimble and we're going to have to be more responsive to those people who are working there. We're also able to bring more things under one roof, not only in the people who are working behind the scenes, but potentially to deliver more direct services to the community and to that part of the state from that location as well. So some of this is born out of the necessity of what we have lived through over the last several months. Some of it is there's certainly lots of these things that those of us in state government and those of us who have been trying to be innovative and all the things that NASCA has had us talking about over the last couple of years, they've simply been elevated or they've been moved forward more quickly than they would have. But I think from the standpoint of getting back to us as an employer, our employees are not interested in us having to move exactly backward to where we were when this all started. And I think that's something that's a challenge for people maybe who have been lifers in state government who are comfortable, because we're all going to be uncomfortable for a while as we work our way through this. But it's absolutely necessary, and we've kind of reached the Rubicon, and there's really no going back, I think, when it comes to our employees and the way that we're going to be delivering those services moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate hearing more about the Wisconsin story. You hit on so many different things, but just one I will leave with all of our members on the call today. Banding together with our colleagues. You mentioned the collaboration and the cooperation among some of your regional counterparts, how critically important that is as well to reach out. Again, we hope NASCA is a vehicle where you can do that, learn from each other, and reach out. So with that, let me turn it back over to Jamie to wrap us up today.
Yes, and thank you, Secretary, so much for talking about Wisconsin. There's so many stories, and there was also something that you said is a lot of these initiatives are things that states have been working on for a long time, either through talking to other states, but this really elevated those initiatives, those innovative initiatives. And so thank you for being on the call to tell your story. We have the NASCA top 10 on our website for anyone who is watching this live or is watching this recorded later on. Feel free to go to the top 10 and dive in and watch and learn more about all these different topics. We'll be talking more about these throughout the year and sharing NASCA. So NASCA is about peer-to-peer sharing and thought leadership and where the industry is going. So with that, I want to thank everyone, and we will end this session. All right, and we're going to go ahead and play our ending footage and call it a session.